Picture this. You are 8 years old. You are sitting in a classroom. A police officer comes in, not to scare you, but to help. He rolls up your fingers one by one onto an ink pad. He presses each one carefully onto a card. He puts a photo of your face next to the prints. This card, he tells you, is for your parents, so that if something happens to you, if you go missing, they can give it to the police, and the police will know who you are. You are 8. You didn't fully understand what "if something happens to you" meant, but you understood enough to know it wasn't good. And then school let out, and you walked home alone, let yourself into an empty house, and waited for someone to come back. My name is Frank, and that right there, that specific contradiction you just sat in, is the thing nobody has ever properly explained about growing up as younger Gen X. The world told you it was the most dangerous time in history to be a child, and then it left you alone to figure it out.
Here is the foundation, the facts behind the experience. If you were born between 1973 and 1980, you grew up during one of the biggest shifts in American family life that had ever happened. According to multiple verified studies and the National Center for Education Statistics, the number of mothers in the workforce doubled between 1969 and 1996. Doubled. Over the same period, from 1960 to 1980, the divorce rate in the United States more than doubled as well. The result? About 40% of Gen X kids became latchkey kids, coming home from school to empty houses, keys strung around their necks, heating up microwave dinners, shouldering more responsibility than their years. 40%. That is not a small group. That is nearly half a generation. And here's the thing that gets lost when people talk about this. It wasn't just the older Gen Xers. The latchkey experience hit younger Gen X, the ones born in the mid to late 1970s, just as hard, maybe harder, because by the time you were in elementary school in the early to mid 1980s, this was just how it was. It wasn't unusual, it was Tuesday. A 2004 marketing study described your generation as having gone through its all-important formative years as one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in U.S. history. Least parented, least nurtured. That wasn't an insult, that was a description of your Tuesday. A 1984 documentary about the situation called you day orphans, not because your parents didn't love you, but because for a few hours every afternoon you were on your own. You made the food, you did the homework, or didn't. You handled whatever came up, and nobody was there to watch. Now, what did those hours actually feel like? Research on latchkey children is pretty consistent on what those hours felt like for the youngest kids. Loneliness, boredom, and fear are most common for those younger than 10 years of age. Not rebellion, not wild behavior. Loneliness, boredom, and fear. Think about what that actually means. You're 7 or 8 or 9. You walk into a house that is quiet. Not peaceful quiet, just quiet. The TV goes on immediately. Not because you want to watch anything in particular, but because the sound makes it feel like somebody else is there. You make yourself something to eat. Maybe cereal again. Maybe you heat something up. You figure it out. And here's the part that never gets talked about enough. A lot of you weren't just alone. You were also in charge. By middle school, many Gen X kids were already responsible for babysitting younger siblings or neighborhood kids, cooking meals, changing diapers, handling things most modern parents wouldn't dream of letting a preteen do. You were 12 years old managing a household, deciding what your little brother ate for dinner, making sure homework got done, yours and someone else's. And when your parent finally walked through the door at 6 or 7 in the evening, the answer to "How was your day?" was "Fine." Because what were you going to say? Now you might be thinking, okay, but kids adapt. Kids are resilient. And that's true. But here's what makes your specific experience different from any other unsupervised childhood in American history. You were alone at the exact same time the whole country decided children were in mortal danger. Here is a sequence of events, all verified, all real. In 1979, a 6-year-old named Eitan Patz disappeared in New York City while walking to the school bus stop. He was never found. In 1981, an Adam Walsh was left near an Atari display at a Sears department store in Florida while his mother stepped away to buy a lamp. She was gone less than 10 minutes. 2 weeks later, his head was found in a drainage canal. In October 1983, a television movie about Adam Walsh aired on ABC. Between 38 and 50 million people watched it. It ended with President Reagan on screen, photos of 54 missing children behind him, saying, "Maybe your eyes can bring them home." In September 1984, dairies in Iowa started printing the photographs of missing children on the sides of milk cartons. Within months, the practice spread nationwide. All told, some 700 dairies took part, producing and distributing approximately 3 billion milk cartons adorned with images of missing kids. 3 billion. You had breakfast with those faces every morning: cereal, toast, orange juice, and a reminder that children went missing and sometimes were never found. Schools held assemblies. There were puppets and robots and board games called Strangers and Dangers. PSAs featured McGruff the crime dog. Police departments advised parents to have their children fingerprinted so they could identify the bodies later. And if you were born between 1973 and 1980, you were between 4 and 11 years old when the stranger danger panic was at its absolute peak, 1981 to 1985. You were in your most impressionable childhood years, the age when fears get wired in, the age when the world forms its shape in your mind. The fear got into you, it was built to, and then at 3 o'clock, you walked home alone. That is not a small thing. That is being told every morning at breakfast that children disappear and then being expected to manage yourself for 3 hours every afternoon with nobody home. Your generation absorbed the message that the world was full of predators, and then your generation was left to navigate that world alone every single weekday for most of your childhood. Now fast forward. The latchkey years are behind you, mostly. You are a teenager, and the news is still awful. If you were born in 1973, you were 15 when the crack epidemic was at its worst. Between 1984 and 1989, the homicide rate for black males aged 14 to 17 doubled in the U.S. That was not abstract statistics. That was the news every night. That was the neighborhoods around you or the neighborhoods your school friends came from. The crack epidemic changed the sound and feel of American cities during your teenage years in a way that people who weren't there often don't fully understand. And at the same time, you were being taught something in sex ed that no generation before you had ever been taught in school. Sex could kill you. Fear of the AIDS epidemic loomed over the formative years of Generation X as much as the threat of a nuclear attack. Your school rewrote the sex education curriculum. The message was direct. This disease existed, it spread, people died, and you needed to know. The HIV/AIDS crisis sparked the safe sex movement and shaped a generation's understanding of health and mortality. If you were born in 1976, you were 18 in 1994 when Pedro Zamora, a young man living with AIDS, appeared on The Real World, San Francisco on MTV. You watched him live openly with the disease, form relationships, decline. He died that same year, at 22. Then President Bill Clinton praised Zamora for his work in educating the public. You weren't watching this as a child. You were watching it as a teenager, figuring out who you were and what the world was. And what you saw was, the world is complicated. People die. Institutions are slow. And you are mostly going to have to figure this out yourself. That was not a new lesson for you. It was just a bigger version of the one that started at 3 o'clock every afternoon since second grade.
Now here's where it gets interesting. Take everything you just heard. The empty house at 3 o'clock, the milk carton at breakfast, the fingerprinting at school, the AIDS messaging as a teenager, the crack epidemic as background noise through your high school years. Take all of that and ask, what would a child who grew up in that environment do as an adult when they had their own kids? When Gen Xers became parents, the pendulum swung hard to the other extreme, overparenting, anxious worry about their children, often erring on the side of being overprotective or not letting their kids handle stressors or challenging situations. You became the helicopter parents, the ones who track their kids' location on their phones, the ones who are at every pickup, every drop-off, the ones who could not stomach the idea of their kids feeling that same loneliness. And here's the thing that makes this funny in a very dark way. People younger than you make fun of helicopter parents constantly. They describe hovering, anxious adults who won't let their kids do anything alone. And technically they're right, but they have no idea why you were that way. You were told the world was the most dangerous place imaginable for a child. Then you were left alone in it, every afternoon, for years. You swore, at some point, maybe consciously, maybe not, that your kids would never feel that particular kind of alone. One person on social media put it simply: an overprotective parent was an unprotected child. That's not a therapy quote, that's a description of cause and effect. You experienced something, it left a mark, and you responded to that mark. That's just how people work. Here is the honest summary of what your childhood made. You grew up being told danger was everywhere. You were left to handle it alone. You learned to make decisions without anyone watching. You figured out how to take care of other people before you were old enough to take care of yourself. You sat with loneliness in a quiet house and got through it. You watched institutions fail, government scandals, the AIDS response, the crack epidemic, and you developed a healthy suspicion of anything that sounded too official or too certain. Gen Xers are typically described as resourceful and independent, traits partly stemming from their latchkey childhoods, as well as keen on maintaining work-life balance, perhaps due to witnessing the demands of their parents' work and subsequent absence from family life. That's the polished version. The real version is you figured out that you were mostly going to have to do things yourself, and you got pretty good at it. And you did something else too, something quieter. You paid attention to what you didn't want to repeat. The parents who were too absent, you tried to show up differently. The world that felt terrifying and uncontrolled, you tried to give your kids something more stable. You overcorrected in some ways, like every generation does, but the impulse was real. You were called the least parented generation in American history. You turned around and decided you were going to parent. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing. What were your experiences growing up as a younger Gen X? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, kindly tap the like and subscribe button below. And you can check out one of the videos on the screen right now. I'll see you there.